All right, we are live. I'm Matt Lewis. He is Charlie Sykes. We are Sykes and Lewis. Charlie, how you doing?
Hey, day by day, what can I say?
I feel like,
Someday, yeah. Well, I mean, look, the news cycle is crazy. And some days, don't you just feel like the symbolism is just almost like too gross? It's like too much on the nose. I mean, you wake up and there is Donald Trump literally tearing down the White House. I mean, he's vandalizing the White House. It's just like, okay, come on, could just the showrunners give us a little bit of a break, a little bit of subtlety, so that we can exercise our creative things. So, what over the weekend, the president, he posts the AI thing of himself, and I'm pardon the language this early in the morning, but dumping a load of shit on fellow Americans. I mean,
yeah.
again, it's like the symbolism. It's like we should all just give up, right? It's just like, okay, the
If you
memes have just
said,
taken over.
if you said he's literally taking a wrecking ball to the White House,
Yeah.
people say, well, that's not what literally does it.
Yeah.
No,
No.
literally he is taking the wrecking ball to the East Wing at least. Which Charlie makes me wonder, could a president just bulldoze if a president was duly elected and just decided that they wanted to put up a condo or something a little more flamboyant than this old one? Could they just tear the White House down? Who would stop them?
Okay, so this seems like a relevant question right now. And again, putting it in the context of if you and I would have said even a few months ago, someday Donald Trump is going to take a big shit on America. He's going to take a wrecking ball to the White House. Oh, Trump derangement syndrome. Okay, well, that was happening. Um,
Right.
uh, but yes, okay, are we at the point now where the president can just like rip down the White House because he wants to, because he wants to build this gaudy, Liberace style gold festoon late late stage Ceausescu ballroom paid for by his oligarch? Or can he just do that? Now, actually, before we started, I raised this question. Imagine, let's fantasize, really fantasize that a Democrat ever wins the White House again. Okay, wins the White House in 2028, and Donald Trump declares that these are the enemies of the people, and no Democrat, no lefty communist Marxist fascist will ever pollute the halls of the White House, and announces that he's tearing it to the ground, that he will be the last occupant of the White House as a symbol that America is destroyed. And Donald Trump, could he do that? I don't know.
Not
Does he
only
have to
could he,
ask
Charlie,
everyone?
the first day everyone would be outraged, and within a week, half the country would think that was the logical, most patriotic thing a person could do, would be to raise the White House like that.
Yeah, and you lived,
It's
you've been
amazing.
owned. You've been owned again. And then
Yeah.
he'll set up an actual palace in Mar-a-Lago. It will be I don't know, the new White House, the Golden House. We're
I
done with
mean,
the White House. I'm sorry. It's just one of those days where I'm thinking our imagination is having a hard time keeping up with the bullshit.
and the founders probably didn't think they needed to put in there something about how Congress would have to approve any changes to the White House or something like that. I mean, we know that like there have been renovations throughout the way. Lots of
Sure,
presidents
sure.
have made changes, and like I think Richard Nixon had a bowling alley at one point.
Hmm.
But this is a little bit different than that. Once again, with Trump, it is qualitatively and quantitatively different.
Right. And there's a conventional political response as well, which is that we're at a point right now where the government is shut down. People are not getting their paychecks. Healthcare is at risk. Inflation is making it harder and harder for Americans to pay their bills. And what does the president of the United States do symbolically? Builds a $250 million ballroom.
Million.
Yeah, and it's sort of like there
The
was there was
optics.
once a time when somebody would have said, "Mr. President, the optics might be a little bit problematic." Now, as we all know, there's no one telling the president, you know, anything. I mean, he if he wants to do it, he's going to do it. It's like he's sitting around going, "I can do anything," right? And Stephen Miller says, "Yes, sir, you can do absolutely anything. I could tear this whole fucking place down, couldn't I? You could do that. Yes, Mr. President, you can. Let's just start with that."
Well, you mentioned the shutdown, and we got a lot of other stuff to talk
Yeah.
about. But I guess there are more polls showing Republicans are being blamed for this more than Democrats, to the extent that anyone cares about the shutdown. But Charlie, I saw someone started one of these online petitions or whatever to say that members of Congress should not be paid during a government shutdown. That seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do, if you ask me. If other people, if TSA agents and air traffic controllers can't get paid for, and they're actually doing their job in most cases, why are members of Congress who have like effectively on vacation half the year, making a pretty decent amount of money still in this day and age,
Yes.
they're still getting paid? Interesting.
Hey, that's actually kind of a golden oldie. I remember that coming up during previous shutdowns, and it is a great idea. I think everybody can get behind that. Speaking of Congress, though, I see that Mike Johnson is out there, nominating Trump for a Nobel Prize and attacking the no Kings. And he's got a lot of time on his hands because you notice that basically the Congress of the United States has gone home. I mean, the House of Representatives is just like gone. I'm looking over your shoulder here. Since July 4th, the House has conducted 20 days of business over 16 weeks. So basically, they are
Amazing.
completely AWOL. And Mike Johnson's presiding over this, empty hall, and with the bats flying around. And we ought to remind ourselves that one of the reasons he's doing it is that, he's decided to shut down the Congress of the United States because he really doesn't want to have that vote on the Epstein files. Let's just keep remembering that the Congress, everything that's happening, because the Congress has basically said, hey, we're going to keep our heads as far down as possible. We can't have that Epstein vote. Damn.
Well, the other thing that Mike Johnson did, I think, Charlie, was make these No King rallies a big success. We probably should talk about this briefly before we
Yeah,
move on to,
sure.
to the
Let's
new
do it. Yeah,
to the new
yeah,
news. But I
yeah,
do think Mike Johnson, by talking about how this was going to be,
yeah.
a party of hate or whatever, hate
Hate
rally,
America.
yeah, hate America. I think that actually spawned interest in people to come out and show that no, in fact, that's not what this was. I know you went in Wisconsin. What was it like?
Yeah, it was. Look, nobody erected gallows. Nobody, tried to storm the Capitol. Nobody, tased police officers. It was peaceful. People had a lot of very, very clever signs. There were lots and lots of American flags. It was that street festival, street carnival type stuff. But you're right. I mean, in a lot of ways, the MAGA smear served to as an advertisement, as an ad for it, but also the event itself was a complete refutation of all the smears because they said, look who shows up. It'll be Antifa.
Yeah.
Look who's up. It'll be the Marxists and the communists. And no, it's basically like, families and, people with gray hair holding up signs, dressing up as Tyrannosaurus Rexes or unicorns and everything. And you would think that at some level there would be kind of an embarrassment, like, yeah, we were wrong. It turned out to be overwhelmingly
Yeah.
peaceful. What did you see?
Well, and let me just say, it's ironic. If you watch the coverage of this, they went from criticizing it for being Antifa and radical and violent to saying it's a bunch of blue hairs with fanny
Yeah,
packs.
that.
I mean,
Yeah, just
but let
split.
me. I do have to ask: did you go by the chocolate factory or the winery, Charlie?
Okay, actually, you obviously do know downtown Cedarburg. We walked the whole length of it. So, and it stretched to the entire length of Cedarburg downtown from the chocolate factory all the way to the winery. And part of the fun was everybody's waving their flags and having a good time, and the cars would drive by and they would honk their horns and everything. One guy in this, honestly, it was, I'm not exaggerating this rusty old truck with this, and he would gun the engine, and he was doing this, Trump, 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 and it was like, I said to my wife, I said, this guy's really leaning into the stereotype just a little bit. I mean, it was, but overwhelmingly supportive. And again, Cedarburg, Wisconsin's in Ozaukee County, used to be a reliably Republican area, a huge turnout.
So I went to the No Kings rally in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. It's a small little college town in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia, and I wore my Reagan Bush
Yeah.
1984 T-shirt, and
Edgy.
it was fun. It was fun. I got a couple. It's hard to say again as a young conservative, like, and I never went to Tea Party things. That was sort of after my time of when I was an activist. But so rallies weren't a thing. Protests were not really a thing that I grew up with. It's very foreign to me.
Mhm.
Coming up as kind of a young Republican. So it was weird going to this, and I'm not sure. I felt a little self conscious with the shirt. But no, nobody said not a single person said a mean thing. And I
Okay.
got several compliments or like, thank you for being here. And, or like, yeah, I got a few. So over, and I brought some little American flags per your recommendation. But again, nobody tried to kill Mike Pence. Nobody beat anybody. Nobody beat any cops with American flags. So overall, I would say a good day and a good time was had by all.
No, I agree. And again, I think it was necessary but not sufficient. Necessary because I think as a morale boost for opponents to look around and to realize that they're not alone, that they are not powerless. So this was very, very important. Some of the punditry, I think, misses the psychological importance. Now,
Yeah.
having said that, does it actually move the needle? Does it change the political dynamic? What happens next if basically people go, well, we accomplished that. Let's look at our social media feeds and then look at the vibes. Then no, it won't lead to anything. So the question is, what happens next? Where does that energy go? Are people going to be smart in standing up and opposing the administration? And that's it to be determined. Don't you think, Matt?
Yeah, totally. Look, and I think, I mean, if I were a Democrat strategist advising candidates, I would say affordability is the thing to run on, not liberal democracy, because it's for whatever reason seems to be a little esoteric or abstract for a lot of folks. Affordability is probably the better campaign message, but I think the no kings argument, which was how they framed this, is utterly defensible and I think very inclusive, and it certainly includes never Trump Reagan conservatives as much as it includes progressives. And so I think the framing of it was good. I think overall it was a positive message. I'm sure there was some,
Yeah.
Palestinian flag somewhere that got on Fox News, but overall, very, nonviolent, very patriotic. And look, there will be, I don't know how effective any rallies ever are, including the Tea Party rally, but there'll be some kid who was there holding a sign that said, we only have one king and it's Jesus. And that kid will become involved in politics because he was at this rally. And so it's hard to quantify the impact that this sort of activities have, but I do think that they matter.
Okay, have we had this conversation before? Because I think that's actually an important point that things like this have a very, very, very long tail. You think of all the young people who became involved in politics in the 1960s. They stayed, for better or worse, whatever your opinion is.
A
They
lot of
stayed.
them were at the rally in Shepherdstown.
Well, I mean, you wore your Reagan book. I could have worn my Clean for Gene T-shirt. You remember, get that reference?
Yes, yes.
For Gene McCarthy.
McCarthy. Yeah.
All those hippies who, shaved off their beards and everything so they could go canvassing for Eugene McCarthy in 1968. No, people do have these formative years, and once you get involved and you get a taste of it, these will be activists for 20, 30, 40 years from now. And this is something I think about that sometimes we tend to think in too short of
Mhm.
time news cycles when in fact, many of the things that happen, will have reverberations decades from now.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of what's happening right now, we're going to be dealing with the fallout, or somebody's going to be dealing with the
Yeah.
fallout 50 years from now.
Well, look,
I mean,
I think a lot of people underestimated the MAGA rallies. I mean, Donald Trump holding all those outdoor rallies,
yeah, right.
they were like Fish concerts or Grateful Dead concerts. There were people there who you would see people that hey, good to see you again. People were like traveling with the band effectively, going on tour. There were vendors selling, probably mean or racist t-shirts, but still there's a community aspect to it. And there hasn't been the other side hasn't had that ability to have that sort of community. So I think this maybe is filling that niche a bit too.
No, and that's important. That is not insignificant at all. Look, I mean, all of the rules of politics have been changed. If you would have said those rallies were going to become a major transformative figure, um, the way the media has changed everything. And this is one of the things, and I think you and I probably talked about this with the shutdown politics, is that I still think that congressional Democrats, these are conventional politicians conducting quasi-conventional politics in a very unconventional time. And I think it's almost as if there's two different games. They've come all set for the lacrosse match, and they walked into the Thunderdome and realized, no, it's not that. The other guy does not want to play chess with you. He wants to punch you in the face. So uh,
Yeah.
I'm recycling this line a lot, which is like, if you sit down for a chess match and the other person punches you in the face, the solution is not to work on your chess skills. And I
Right.
sometimes think that a lot of our political commentary is assuming that the world has not changed in ways that we cannot grasp. And that's why your point about this is going to have an effect 40 or 50 years from now. It's possible that one of the fallouts will be that people now realize how important things like liberal democracy are. They've taken them for granted. We became all complacent about the Constitution and why free speech. A few years ago, if you would have said, why is free speech a good thing? You would have gotten a lot of, well, of course it's. Now I think people have to think it through, and they will be able to attach it to certain events. So,
Hmm.
you and I, back in the, back in, in the before times would say, it's possible the government will try to silence your speech. Well, now you have an entire generation growing up where they have very tangible examples of that. Every time they turn on Jimmy Kimmel, they go, hey, remember when the president of the United States and the FCC, tried to get him fired, tried to get him shut down. So who
Yeah.
knows how this will play out.
Well, one of the other problems, Charlie, is I think as people have gotten um, have moved past caring about liberal democracy or appreciating it, we've also, I think, one of the other byproducts of that has been an embrace of violence in politics, and not just violent rhetoric, but people on both sides of the aisle. And I hate to be that guy, the both siderism, but people increasingly saying that violence is an acceptable way to fix our politics. And Charlie, we have examples of things like that happening right now. You have got Graham Plattner, this Democratic candidate in Maine, sort of the oysterman veteran, who talked about being a communist and said, you're not going to stop effectively was saying that revolutions have to have violence. You've got Jay Jones, the Democrat candidate for Attorney General in Virginia, talking about using violence against the then, I think it was House Speaker in Virginia. We've also obviously got these young Republicans. I love Hitler. This guy Paul Ingrassia, I think is his name, the lead
Why
Office of
does this
Special
keep
Counsel.
happening? Why does this happening keep happening to these nice people? It's almost like there's a pattern.
Well,
I
there's
don't
a
know.
pattern. And
Mm.
then let me just say the January 6th rioter, Christopher Moynihan, arrested Sunday after saying in text that he planned to, quote, eliminate Hakeem Jeffries. So
Oh,
a couple patterns. One, people are getting caught for things that they've texted or posted on Reddit.
no.
So some of it could be the so-called shit posting and trolling. But I think, as I said years ago, I think I coined the phrase "out of the abundance of the heart, the hand tweets." But I think it also texts and
Mhm.
Reddits as well. So this could the point here, Charlie, is I think this could be revelatory of that people, in fact, do think violence is the answer now.
I, look, we have. I feel like years ago I was saying we live in a very, very dangerous time, and that danger is increasing exponentially. There are people who, I mean, when you have the president of the United States almost on a daily basis pouring kerosene on a really volatile situation, it is dangerous. The rhetoric has ramped up, and I have to say that I was actually thinking about this yesterday. That how when people describe what Trump is doing as conservative, it's ridiculous because we are living in through a revolution in revolutionary times with now an increasingly revolutionary ethos. So I don't think that people should be
Totally.
surprised when people say, The only way that we are going to be able to counter this is through acts of violence. And it becomes kind of a vortex as people
Yeah.
begin to respond to the rhetoric and the actions of the others. Look, what the administration is doing, these texts that you cited, really, I think, pale in significance to what the administration is doing. That it is deploying state, violence against, not just against criminals, but against the opposition. And the president continues to describe anyone who opposes him as the opposition. When you begin to describe your political opponents as extremists and terrorists,
Yes.
knowing that at the same time he justifies the use of maximum force against terrorists, you are now institutionalizing the violence. Now, it's always institutional, but institutionalizing that violent mindset. You know, I'm again playing this game we're playing like 20, 30 years from now when we look back on this. How many Americans are going to say, okay, the system clearly has failed. We are in a post-democratic world. If you're in a post-democratic world, then how do we resolve these things
Yeah.
other than adopting the tactics of our opponents? So this is
Well,
very
yeah. I mean,
scary, and it's not
escalation.
theoretical, right? Yeah.
No, and so escalate, and at a certain point, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, yeah, actually, we do have to become radical to fight fire with fire. I mean, so Charlie, during after the first Trump administration, I'll speak for myself, but I assume you were probably with me. My, I was urging Democrats, like, do not fight fire with fire. Become the normie party. Become the party that is sane and that is centrist and that protects institutions. And so I was telling Joe Biden, like, don't pack the courts, don't nuke the filibuster, all that stuff, right? Now I kind of feel naive to have said that because Trump gets back in and starts doing things like targeting his adversaries, people like John Bolton, people like Comey.
Yeah, yeah.
He starts sending in the National Guard into U.S. cities that do not want him there. And you get down the list with ICE and everything else, masked ICE agents deporting people to El Salvador who aren't from El Salvador. We'll get into a little bit more of that later. And so at a certain point, you're like, well, maybe we do have, maybe the smart move for Democrats is actually to pack the court. Maybe it actually is to make DC a state. And so people even like me who have conservative, not just right wing, but conservative sensibilities, who want to preserve institutions at a certain point, it actually becomes like the obvious move that, look, if we want to preserve the country, we have to play by their rules. That's
Well,
the
I
problem.
think you're. Well, I think that what you just said there is descriptive of what we may go through. What has to happen after Trump is we have to find a way to Trump-proof the government. I mean, make it, create those actual, batten down the hatches, create actual guardrails. Now, is that what's going to happen, or is it basically going to be, okay, now it's our turn to engage in the abuse of power and in retribution? And actually, Robert Reich had a very sort of interesting question, like, okay, do we really want to go into this vortex? At some point, though, and this is what I think is important about what you just said, it becomes irresistible. It becomes, you're like, no, no, let's not fight, back what they're doing. And that is the problem. The failure of the Biden administration was not in that they should have packed the courts. Um, their real failure was that they did not aggressively pursue Donald Trump's criminality early on. Their naivete was to believe that somehow the fever had broken and they didn't need to worry about it anymore. That was a fundamental world historical mistake.
Mhm.
And also the fact they left things like the Insurrection Act on the books. They did not provide the kinds of protections for the government. Now, the problem with doing many of the things that they have to do is it will limit their power as well. And so maybe that's the same thing, but I would say
Yeah.
that what you have to do is you have to have restoration, and you have to find a way to restore it without without, I don't know, surrendering.
Yeah.
Your
There's a
values.
million, but the problem is, Charlie, there are a million things that could be done to sort of button things down. But the founders, I think, never envisioned that everything would have to be statutorily spelled out, right? The
No.
president shall not bulldoze the East Wing. Or how about this one?
Yeah.
The pardon power. That's something, if we're going to fix something, I don't think a president should just unilaterally be able to pardon anybody he wants, but they can. And George Santos pardoned.
Oh,
Now
wow.
Trump is talking about considering commuting P. Diddy's sentence.
Mhm.
And so if you're famous, if you're nice to Trump, you can get pardoned even for January
Everything
6th.
for my friends, for my enemies, the law. Right.
Exactly. And I mean, it's unbelievable. Every day there is more and more crazy outrage. And at a certain point, people lose the capacity to be outraged by this.
Well, I hope not. Look, I am loath to second guess or to criticize the founders, but they made the judgment. I mean, look, what was the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution other than a no kings document? The entire point of the Constitution was to limit the power of government, right? It was to make sure that this kind of imperial power could never be concentrated. It's why they created three branches of government. It's why you create the checks and the balances, why you have a Bill of Rights, all of that. But as you point out, they didn't feel the need, having done that, they didn't feel the need to write everything into statutory language because they just assumed that A, you would either have honorable people in all of those positions, or that the honorable people would stop the dishonorable people who might have slipped into office. That it was not impossible. They assumed, I think, that only the best and the brightest people would end up as president of the United States. That there would
And
never
more and
be.
moral, that,
Yeah, right,
religious and moral
and
people.
have a sense of shame. But that even if someone like, and look, you think about it through their eyes, even like if somebody like an Aaron Burr became president, they believed that, well, he would be limited by the much more powerful Congress and by the courts, and surely, our society would press back against him. The problem is that was it turns out to be naive, but the biggest mistake they made was this unchecked pardon power, which now, with you couple that with Supreme Court decision, makes Donald Trump and his administration almost literally unaccountable and above the law. I understand you can bring criminal charges at the state level, but the reality is that in MAGA world right now, that as long as you stay loyal as possible, as long as you suck up hard enough, Donald Trump will give you an unlimited get out of jail free card. And if you break with them and you go the other way, you put everything at risk. And this is not a theoretical could happen. This is where we're at. I mean, George Santos is one of the most dishonest scumbag con men ever, right? Matt, I mean, he's
Yeah.
almost a class by himself.
Well, and it's like Steve Bannon, the reason he actually got in hot water was defrauding MAGA people, right, about building the wall. And George Santos, I mean, it defies logic. I mean, if you are a blue collar, working class, kind of conservative, rural guy, and you're busting your butt to make a living, and this sort of fat cat, cross dressing, elitist is in a grift making all this money. Like, isn't it unpopulist to pardon this guy? You would think,
Yeah,
right?
yes, but you know how it works, right? Let's say we're sitting at a bar with that guy and going, let's go to George Santa. What would within the first 90 seconds, what would you hear? You know, well, what about that
Yeah.
scumbag? What about Hunter Biden or something like that? We live in a world of where whataboutism is the god, and that whatever crime or outrage you can point out, they will look at they can absorb it, but then they'll find out if there's anything that I could point at on the other side. And this is where, Fox News and others are very, very helpful because they will, provide sort of an endless stream of examples and ammunition for that, right? If there was one person who behaved badly at the No Kings rally, I can pretty much guarantee they were probably on Fox News,
Yeah.
right? One person. Yeah, but
So
George Santos.
Yeah.
Hey, can I make my prediction? Can I go out on my
Oh,
limb?
please. Yeah, please, please.
Okay, because I think what Trump is doing is, he's testing limits. How far can I push everything? How can I, what can I get away with? And you know what? If I go too far, I just triggered the libs, which is great too. He's going to pardon that cop, Derek Chauvin, who killed
Yeah.
George Floyd. Now, having said that, there's still state charges, so Chauvin may not walk free. But people are going to be. I think they don't see it coming, and yet there are major voices in MAGA saying that if you really want to trigger the libs, you want to go back to the entire George Floyd era,
Yeah.
turn it on its head, and pardon the cop who knelt on his neck. I think he's going to do it. What do you think?
Well, this Paul Ingrassia guy that you know
Hmm.
talked about the MLK holiday and said he had a quote Nazi streak. He compared Martin Luther King to um, who's the person that Derek Chauvin killed.
George
I'm
Floyd.
missing to George Floyd. He compared
Yeah.
MLK to George Floyd. Look, here's the problem I have with this. Look, my dad was a prison guard. My father-in-law used to be a police officer. I mean, it's a tough gig, man.
Yeah.
But we have video of this guy kneeling
Yeah.
in somebody's neck for like 5 minutes, and I don't understand. It's not a close call, and even people like Ben Shapiro, who are hardly the worst offender. I
Mhm.
mean, was considered kind of a mainstream conservative, not a crazy right winger, um, is leading the charge of pardoning Chauvin. I don't get it. I don't understand it, but
Yeah.
I think clearly, um, for some reason, they see 2020 and that whole kind of civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, that as a turning point that
They
is.
do.
I don't understand it, but they see that as like
Well, I
when
understand. I understand their
everything went
thinking. Yeah.
sideways. Yeah,
No, it is, and again, I am speculating that they haven't done it. But I mentioned actually I mentioned it to illustrate the point that you were making that the pardon power is the one thing that actually seems to undermine all of the other constitutional protections because it does mean that the president of the United States can wipe away the rule of law by whim, maybe even for himself. So I think that ultimately what Donald Trump is going to do is he will pardon every member of ICE, a blanket pardon. I'm making this up, but I want people to think it through. That we worry about the abuses and the crimes that might be happening. He's basically sent out the message either implicitly or explicitly that if you are one of my guys, you
yeah.
can do anything. I have your back. I will make sure that you never face any legal consequences for it. And that is not the kind
Yeah.
of society that that the founders wanted.
This is when Joe Biden pardoning Hunter
It was
doesn't.
very bad.
It's not helpful. Not helpful. But we'll move
It was
on.
extremely not helpful. No,
the
I mean
founders
extremely not helpful. Yeah.
the founders thought that Congress would push back against the executive power, and
Yeah.
they thought that the American public, the American people, that if they were virtuous people, that they would hold the politicians accountable
We all
too.
thought that. Mhm.
And that gets me to where I'm going to now. Um, Democrats, despite the excitement that may be coming off this No Kings rally, things are not looking great for Democrats. I've already mentioned Graham Plattner, his little scandal in Maine. He was kind of seen as the exciting progressive candidate that might be the nominee against.
He does have a good candidate up there, though.
Yeah, and up in Maine, the one Republicans need. I'm sorry,
They
I
need
always
that
think of
seat.
my I always think of myself as a Republican. So whenever I'm talking about the good guys, I inevitably it's an old habit because right now Republicans are not the good guys. Democrats have to
Absolutely.
flip that seat if they're going to take the Senate. But Charlie, it gets worse for Democrats, right? So the generic ballot that I think in 18 had at this point had Democrats up by like 8 or 9 points. They're only up by 3.
Yeah, not
There's
bad.
gerrymandering that's happening in Texas. California is trying to offset it, but there's all these other red states because guess what? Number one, Democrats are cloistered in cities. They haven't
Uh,
spread themselves out enough. And then also, there are now more Republicans and Democrats in the country for the first time since like
Well, and you
FDR.
have this Voting Rights Act case for the
Yeah.
Supreme Court that may blow up a lot of Democratic seats. Now, again, that may have a lot of unintended consequences. But yeah, this thing is not a gimme for the Democrats. The midterms are not a foregone conclusion. And look, we have a long way to go. Have we seen all the cards that Trump is prepared to use to suppress the vote, to change the vote, to rewrite the district lines? And again, the irony is that they kept complaining about how the 2020 election was rigged, and yet you can see they have this vast apparatus. Like we are definitely going to be trying to rig this 2026 election. So I think that the red lights ought to be flashing. I agree with you.
Yeah. It's legal rigging. I mean, they're doing it. You could argue unethical. You could argue certainly goes against. It's certainly unchivalrous. And goes against the ethos of kind of playing the long game of not running up the score, but it is rigging clearly. I mean, they're trying to guarantee an outcome, and it goes against the norms and institutions that we normally have. And look, you said it's not a gimme, but here's the problem: it was. I mean, even a month or two ago, Charlie, I think every political analysts in the country. You go to the Charlie Cooks, of the world, those types. If you went to a political briefing, they would have said, the Senate's going to be tough, but Democrats, history would tell you, Democrats are going to take the House. That the House,
Yeah,
and then at least you build from there.
yeah.
And I just think the psychic toll, if Democrats are unable to win even the House in this midterm election, I don't know what does that. I'm asking it in the form of a question. Does that demoralize people and make them realize they can't win, or does it motivate them to fight against this unfair
You
rigging?
mean after it's happened, or the,
Yeah.
or the prospect of?
Or
No, no. I
when
think that people.
when we realize
Well,
it. Yeah.
no, I think. Well, first of all, we'll worry about what the fallout is afterwards. Afterwards, I think that at this point, this goes back to the No Kings rally. People need to be motivated. They need to be engaged. And I have started to think that we overestimate how much we actually know is going to happen in politics. I
Yes.
remember right before the 2018 election, there were all of the people were really, really, really expecting this massive Republican wave and everything. It didn't happen. Democrats kind of held their own. Here in Wisconsin, we have had a series of extremely close Supreme Court elections that turned out not to be close at all because people are so engaged, they are so energized. So it's too early to have it's way too early to panic. I would suggest though, and I'm featuring this in my newsletter, to the country newsletter, today. Very interesting editorial in the New York Times. You read this, where they really crunched the numbers and looked at, who are the majority makers in America? And the answer is very, very clear. You want the data. The data is all there. Centrist candidates outperform their parties um, consistently, consistently. And if Democrats want to win the majority, they're going to have to win in many congressional districts that Donald Trump won. We talked to you about the map. In other words, you have to have people who can win in red states. Now, who are they? Who are those Democrats? They tend to be Democrats that are a little bit unorthodox, more centrist than progressive. The progressives may, get your willies going, maybe on the cover of various magazines. But I'm sorry, Mandami and AOC are not the majority makers. They could not win in these seats, that are controlled, at least for now. So I hope that people do understand the importance of making a decision. Do you scratch your ideological id and demand that everybody check all of your, culture war issues, or do you recognize how absolutely crucial it is to win these elections? And these elections are going to be won in those centrist swing states. Now, this is perhaps an unfashionable, unpopular idea, but if you want to look at the numbers, I strongly suggest you check out the infographic the New York Times has, because it's pretty compelling.
The only caveat I might have to that, Charlie, is what is a centrist, right? Because Donald Trump, in many ways, was a centrist. I mean, he is radical, an extreme right winger, like temperamentally, and he's certainly revolutionary. As you said, he's not a conservative, but he wasn't an orthodox philosophical conservative. He didn't want to do anything about fixing Social Security. He doesn't
Correct.
want to do means testing. So he was populist. And so, in some ways, Donald Trump was a centrist. And so, when I think about Democrats, you know, when I think when they think centrist, what they think is we need a politician, someone who's safe. Centrist means safe when Trump isn't safe. And so, help me unpack that. Like,
No, no,
what does it really mean?
well, okay, that's an excellent question, and I don't mean safe, and I don't mean bland. I mean, part of the new rules of politics are that people want an entertaining candidate. I mean, they want somebody who is going to be a fighter, but they want somebody who's going to be a fighter for them. The most effective campaign ad, everybody knows this, and the most effective campaign ad of 2024 was the Trump ad where he said, she is for them, Trump is for you. Now that had to do with the trans issue, which we can come back to in a moment. And they spent $100 million on this one ad. And so I think the key thing is that I will fight for you. He fights for the other guys. But also, I think that, and this is where I think Democrats have lost a little bit of their edge with some of those voters, because those voters don't think they are on your side. That the Democratic candidate is not going to help you buy, the big ass truck. The Democratic that the Democratic candidates actually look down on you or have exotic views about the culture wars. And I'm sorry to lose half our audience here, but if Democrats continue to die on the mountain that transgender athletes is not an important issue, then Republicans are going to run that play down your throat, down the middle, over and over and over again. There are people like Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, running for the Senate. He was one of the first guys who said, "Look, guys, I don't want boys playing in girls' sports, whatever the deal is." And he got absolutely filleted for it. But frankly, if you're going to find a way to say, hey, I actually share your values, I respect your values, I'm not going to call you a bigot if we disagree. And now let's talk about the populist message of who's on your side and who's not. This guy building the fucking golden ballroom is not on your
Yeah.
side. He's on the
Yeah.
side of the billionaire. I mean, okay, so it would be something along those lines.
Well, yeah. And as you know, as growing up as a conservative, I always hated class warfare. Um, and the politics of envy. But I actually think that's probably the way to go if you're a Democrat right now. Forget the
Now,
trans issue. Talk about money and affordability, and not only affordability, but the fact that like it used to cost, if you wanted to own a home, it used to be
yeah.
something like 3 times your annual income. Now it's like 8 times a person. Like it is becoming impossible for a kind of a working class, middle class person to make it in this country.
Well, have you tried to buy a new
People,
car lately? Have you seen what
it's
the
just
stock is there?
ridiculous. Not even a new car, a used. It's. I mean, and I think you can do that in a way that you know expresses some anger, some frustration, some populist energy, and you're not going to turn off Middle America Joe Sixpack. So, hey guys, if you have a question for Charlie, uh, you know, get it, you know, get it ready to roll. You can get it chambered. I have one more question that I want to ask you, and people can
Yeah.
kind of get theirs ready. But want to talk about this latest story. I've got a couple questions, but we'll talk about this one. Um, Marco Rubio apparently,
Oh my God.
in order to be able to send non El Salvadorians to an El Salvadorian gulag, cut a deal with Bukele, President Bukele down there, Bukele, to basically Rubio betrayed these MS-13 informants. And, my take is whether it's the Kurds, Ukraine, or Afghan interpreters, I cannot understand why anybody, and it pains me to say this as an American, but why on earth would anybody cut a deal with us thinking we're going to honor our words? This is very bad.
Okay, it is very, very bad. And I'm really glad you highlighted it because the dishonor is the point here, is that the United States made a pledge, made a promise, right, to these guys that we will, if you inform on the gang, we will protect you, and then we will use that information to take down the gang. This is a law enforcement tool, and in that story that you just mentioned in the Washington Post, you have senior law enforcement officials say what a betrayal of trust this is. This wipes away years of work, of painstaking work, of finding ways to penetrate these gangs. So it makes us less safe. It actually helps the gangs in a certain way because who's going to now come and talk? But there's also an interesting detail. Why is it Bukele? Is that how you pronounce it?
That's how I'm pronouncing it.
Okay. Why he demanded this? Then this was the quid pro quo. You have to give up your informants if you want to be able to use our gulag, because he was concerned that they might help an investigation into his relationship with the gangs. He's got this big tough on crime image, but apparently he's been, cutting deals with them, and he has contacts within the gangs. Maybe he has his own informants. And so he was trying to shut down an investigation into him as well. So the layers of dishonor and corruption are truly extraordinary. And I'm really glad you mentioned that story.
And, Marco Rubio, of all people, should know better. And I sound like an idiot saying what I just said, but of all people, I wouldn't think that Rubio, I would think that Rubio would know better and would understand the consequences of this.
Well, he does know better, which makes it worse. If it's a complete idiot, I have actually, there's a differentiation. And even in Dante's Hell, the people who, should really know the best are actually in the deeper hole. There are a lot of genuine morons in this administration. Marco Rubio is not a moron. He may be a lot of other things. So the fact that he knows exactly what he's doing and he knows the consequences.
This is an interesting taxonomy. I would love to do the 9 levels of MAGA hell and see each person would be assigned to a different level. And you think Rubio would be at the lowest of the low in that regard?
Well, it's hard to get lower than Stephen Miller.
The worst of the worst, as Trump likes to say.
Robert F. Kennedy. This would be hard.
Well, because I think Rubio can do some good too by playing along. Do I sound naive?
No. But, okay.
But this one is. I don't think it's worth it to do. You do this. This to me crosses a line.
Well, there've been so many lines that have been crossed. I'm sure that's the way Rubio, tells it to himself. I'm here. I will, bad things can happen. And by the way, I am reevaluating the decision made by a lot of folks in Trump 1.0, the grown-ups who actually stayed in the administration, who did tell themselves, if I'm not here, it will be somebody worse. Turns out they were right. They're gone, and they have, to a person, been replaced by somebody much, much worse. So,
but
I was very critical of that.
No, they were right. Absolutely, that's documentably, obviously true. But what if they hadn't? What if they hadn't postponed the inevitable? What if they had let Trump do what he wanted to do? Maybe Trump wouldn't have gotten a second term either.
Who knows?
The acceleration is the acceleration theory.
Well, that's right. Anytime you change the past, I'm sure you played the, woulda, coulda, shouldas back, to 2015. What if Rush Limbaugh would have denounced, Donald Trump in 2015?
The one guy.
Rush
was the one guy who maybe would have had a shot. I don't even know.
Yeah.
But if he had done it at the right time, he might have had the credibility on the right and the power and influence to smother Trump.
Yeah, and what if all the Republicans said in public what they were saying in private early in 2016, all of them, as opposed to, Yeah, we don't want to really go after him now. I mean, there's so many woulda, coulda, shouldas, but here we are. But Marco Rubio betraying the faith and honor of the U.S. government. I mean, it's not just that he broke his word. He broke the word of the United States government. And by the way, this is one of those stories that every gang member, every thug in the world who might be thinking, maybe I need to cut a deal to save my
Yeah.
skin. Basically, no, you can't trust these guys. It doesn't matter what they say to you.
We did this to the Kurds. We did this to the entire nation of Ukraine. We did this to the Afghan interpreters. And now we're doing it to these informants, these gang informants.
Yeah.
Why would anybody cut a deal with us? Unless they had no other choice. But do not expect us to honor the deal, because obviously we're not going to do that if
Yeah.
we have an opportunity to do something else.
But since we're also talking about this, now we're getting more evidence trickling out about the people that we've murdered in these boats. And look, I mean,
Venezuela, you're talking
in,
about, right?
in Venezuela, but also the president of Colombia
Colombia, yeah.
is saying that you murdered an innocent fisherman. And the response by the president, he did not take it well. So instead of like saying, no, that's not true, really, what he's doing, he's cutting off all aid to Colombia, who, by the way, has been a good partner in fighting the drug trade again with us. So we're taking steps that undermine our ability while we're antagonizing the country. But again, the evidence is getting shakier and shakier that when we engage, this country engage in the extrajudicial murder of these people in these boats, that we may not have gotten the right people, that all of them might not have been narco terrorists. I think it's very interesting that we actually recovered two of them, two survivors. You notice they were supposed to be
They
narco
send them
terrorists.
back, right? Yeah.
We don't want them near an American court, do we?
Yeah.
Now, what does that
Well,
say?
and this will sound, golly gee, Beaver. I mean, this will sound really naive too, but I mean, part of how Ronald Reagan won the Cold War was creating this image that America was a beacon on a hill, a shining city, like
Yeah.
all of this stuff. And they say that, like, the moral authority, having moral authority, and that it is a powerful weapon if people can believe you. And if you have an image of being the good guys, people sense that you are the good guys. Like, we have really pissed that all away. I think it goes without
Well,
saying.
we've replaced it with the strongman theory that we don't need to have any, love and soft power because we have hard power. We don't have to have people who trust us because we have people. We will make them fear us, and that's the whole thing. Why would you make a deal with the United States? Because we are the biggest bully, and we're going to kill you if you don't make a deal with us. I mean, that is the philosophy of this administration, right? Is that we're going to punch you in the face, we're going to blow you up, we will kill you. Now make nice to us, as opposed to, the United States represents a force for good and for freedom. That is trustworthy, a model of democratic behavior. I mean,
Yeah.
that's gone.
The last best hope until we sell you out. Early. I still love this country, but we need to live up to our better angels and get back to being the white hats. Charlie, we're pushing up on an hour, my friend. Any final thoughts before we bid adieu?
Well, you know what? We'll have more to talk about next week. That's the final thought.
Whether we like it or not.
And the problem is that next Tuesday we'll go, wow, what happened a week or so ago? I mean, this is something that you and I really have to work on. Like, what are the stories that are the sticky stories, the stories that actually are going to matter and are going to change stuff, and how much is just simply the noise? Let me concede here, even though I'm obsessed with it, that the AI picture of Donald Trump dumping shit on the protesters, that's noise. That's revealing.
Yeah.
But, ultimately, it does. The fact that, for example, in the last week, we learned that they intend to weaponize the IRS to go after their political opponents. That, on the other hand, that ought to be sticky. I mean, that's one of those
Yeah.
things that if you're doing a marker on Democratic backsliding, I think that would be one of them.
Well, look, I'm biased, but I would venture to say we cover some deeper stuff than I think our ratio of bullshit to substance is pretty good
Well, I think
as
so too.
these shows go.
Oh, I'm willing to talk about the bullshit too. I mean, don't get me wrong.
You'll get it all. You'll get it all here.
Oh yeah.
If you're following me but not Charlie on Substack, follow Charlie. If you're following Charlie and not me, follow me. And we'll do it every Tuesday at 10 until they come and take us away, I guess. 10 Eastern time, right?
Until.
All right, my friend. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks for watching, everybody. Charlie's being taken away right now. They're coming to get you.